The following is rated not safe for work. It contains strong language, adult situations, and lots of spoilers. Discretion is advised.
In the criminal justice system, cinematic-based offenses are considered especially heinous. The dedicated attorneys who investigate these villainous films are members of an elite squad known as the Reels of Justice. These are their stories.
Order, please, order. Reels of Justice is now in session. Judge Maynard Bangs presiding. Your eyes for the Honorable Judge Bangs.
Be seated. Welcome to the Reels of Justice. This is a court-martial. Today we are hearing the case of The People versus the Hurt Locker, a 2008 war film starring Jeremy Renner as a bomb diffusion expert serving in the Iraq War who plays by his own freaking rules, man. For those of you unfamiliar with our court proceedings, we are here to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. As always in this courtroom, films are to be considered excellent until proven awful, and the burden of proof lies upon the prosecution to prove beyond a shadow of a reasonable doubt that this film is guilty. Mr. Bryan Bintliff, you are representing the prosecution. You may present your opening statement.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like to start by establishing slight credentials. I have spent 15 years of my humble life in the United States Army, so this is a near and dear case to my heart. So first, I will say that in your particular statement is my opening statement. You said this is a war film. The onus of my entire argument is that I do not believe that this is a war film. I believe that at best, this is a cowboy film disguising itself as a modern war movie to garner relevance and attention. Had there not been fantastic examples of Iraq war portrayals over the last 20 years, then this could have been a solid attempt at making this generation's Platoon or something of the like. But it comes down to this fundamental fact that non-veterans writing original war stories feel hollow. Truth is more interesting than fiction when it comes to war. And therefore, along with aspects of pacing, a very dated form of cinematography, I must say that this film leaves me, others, and especially the veteran community wanting in terms of a representative piece of cinematography. And at very least, it is a mediocre film that received too much praise. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Mr. Bintliff. It sounds like we're going to put this movie up against the wall. Do they still do that? I don't know if they still do that. I don't think
depends on what school you go to.
Appearing on behalf of the defense is Mr. Dylan J. Schlender. Please present your opening statement.
Well, thank you, Your Honor, and I think I speak for everyone here in the court when I thank opposing counsel for his service to the country. He joins a long list of veterans we've had on this show, and Reels of Justice is nothing if not pro-veteran. But as we go into this movie, as we get older, especially you, Judge, it is amazing the memories we have that we keep in focus. You see, these are called flashbulb memories. They're collective cultural moments we have. And obviously the biggest in our generation is, of course, the terrorist attacks on September 11th, 2001. That tragic day would ultimately lead to two wars, which have now come to their close. And much like the soldiers in this feature, we are sorting through that cultural rubble. 2002 through 2021 is a whopping 19 years. And in that time, we saw movies about, whether it was directly or indirectly, the wars in the Middle East. For example, we've discussed Battle Los Angeles on here. Today we are now.
It's a real war.
But I'm saying though,
it was a real war.
That's indirectly related to this, an insurgency conflict. So we are discussing today what some may call the peak of this genre. The Hurt Locker succeeds on many fronts. In fact, the only front it fails on is on being bad. So in this case, we're going to discuss the soldiers, reporters, the directors, the actors, the political and non-political elements that pulled this Best Picture winner together. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Schlender. Mr. Bintliff, you may present your first exhibit.
First and foremost, I could go on forever about the constant and racking inaccuracies of this film, but let's go to my first argument that this is a cowboy film or a Western in a different desert, if you will. And because we are presented with three main characters, played by three actors of similar age, representing very different ranks. So we have the do not give a shit team leader, who's treated somehow simultaneously as the new guy. For Sergeant First Class William James, played by Jeremy Renner. All right, this guy basically comes into the team and is talked down to by people senior in rank that would not even remotely happen. Then you have Sergeant J.T. Sanborn, played by Anthony Mackie. An admirable performance, I will say, but he's supposed to be the standardized, regulation-heavy, anchor character, if you will. And then you have Brian Garrity playing Specialist Owen Eldridge, who's supposed to be the young fellow, the young specialist who the younger audience is supposed to empathize with. Now,
the religious guy who goes crazy.
So, yes. Well, yeah, it's not really quite religious, but we see him playing Gears of War, so he's supposed to appeal to the youth. Now...
Some would say his reactions are remarkably sane.
Yes, but it's almost frustratingly so in both directions. He was supposed to acknowledge that he has trauma already, blah, 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 blah. But anyway, we have here a main character played by Jeremy Renner, who is a cowboy. He basically comes in, feels he can do whatever he wants. He's given costuming that is supposed to stand out. He's not wearing a standard, let's say, bulletproof vest. His medals are all wrong. He says he comes from Afghanistan and that he was in a ranger battalion, which I must tell you is extremely prestigious, but they have nothing to do with disarming bombs. If anything, they set them more than they do disarm them. Anyway, this is an unlikable character. An unreally relatable character. He has no real basis in reality. Then you have Anthony Mackie's character.
Well, before we move on to another one,
yes,
Mr. Schlender,
please.
Any rebuts you have about Jeremy Renner's character in particular?
Oh, well, he is the main character, Your Honor, so there's a lot we could talk about. And as I'm sure opposing counsel knows, you can get the Ranger distinction without actually serving in the Rangers.
But
right?
not having a scroll. He has a scroll as his deployment patch, not just the tab.
And there were EOD. My dyslexia is going to kill me with some of these
it's okay.
abbreviations.
That's why I gave you the case.
Yeah, I know. So, and there were EOD Army divisions. There's a few companies. I was just looking up the numbers here. There's like about 5,000 people who do this, and ultimately, that background information is rather incidental. This movie is about the moment, and it is about his actions, which I'm sure opposing counsel is going to get more into, but are justified in the context of this being a movie. We need to understand that when Mark Bowl wrote this, he's been very upfront saying that this is indeed a work of stylized fiction. I mean, look at who the director is, Catherine Bigelow. This is exactly in her oeuvre of dangerous men playing by their own rules, whether you want to look back to the Keanu Reeves, Patrick Swayze movie or the Blue Steel. I mean, come on. This is something that's in the genre. And in regards to the other characters, there's nothing wrong with having archetypes that project different facets of characters, of soldiers that we would be seeing in this conflict.
But you said you used a very interesting word just then, and I appreciate it. Archetypes. One of my central dislikes about this particular film, especially in regards to the characters, is that they feel more like archetypes than actual people. And once again, I'm looking at this film. It came out after, I will use one of my favorite examples, one of the best representations of the modern military and the Iraq War to date, Generation Kill.
To be fair, they came out right around the same time. We're talking less than a year apart.
2007 and the other. And so, yes, very much to be fair.
Yeah, basically made right on top of each other.
Ooh.
Both based, and both made, and I agree. Generation Kill is a very good representation, and kind of like, and just like The Hurt Locker, it is based on. It was based on a memoir in that case, whereas Hurt Locker is based on Mark Bowles' experience being embedded as a reporter. So he's bringing a stylized eye to it in a way that Generation Kill wouldn't, because that's straight up memoir. He wrote an article for Playboy magazine. I believe it was called "The Man in the Bomb Suit."
Nobody
which was
read
the
it.
Colonel. Yeah.
There are articles in those?
Yeah, right. Which was the kernel of the idea for what the Hurt Locker would ultimately become. Whereas Generation Kill is just straight up adaptation from an actual soldier's memoir. So we have a difference in kind here as far as presentation goes, Your Honor.
Yes. And the presentation takes many liberties, especially with the conduct. I know it's not supposed to be a documentary of a real thing, but one of my key dislikes is that several times throughout this film, and not even under duress, these three men who represent this team, there's one, an inaccurate number of people for the team, go into buildings and areas by themselves without any actual security, and they conduct room clearing, overwatch security, and other such tactics without even any real security that would be provided by, the folks that we kind of see bunched up outside or standing far away. They basically become some sort of amalgamation of a Special Forces ODA mixed with EOD, mixed with, I don't know, a sniper team. And I said, we can pick apart scene by scene, but this is sort of amalgamating the experiences of many into a few, which is, by my account, maybe it's a budgetary concern. I could understand that, but this gives a very unrealistic and sort of fantasy level, reality shattering image of what these real people who with a very dangerous job actually do.
Mr. Schlender, what's so special about these specialists?
I can actually explain a couple of different points here that I brought up. And of course, he is right. An EOD unit would have significant amount of overwatch. We do see some of these soldiers, but they are kind of more huddled away. That way we could focus on the core three. And some of these things he talks about them doing, they're not supposed to do, right? Like when they're blowing up the ordnance outside of the base, they're not supposed to do that. That's why they ran into Ralph Fiennes and the contractors there. When they go searching after the people who blew up the bomb there, when they're running through the cities. And remember, at the very, very end, when the young guy's at the helicopter, what does he say to Jeremy Renner? He says, sincerely, fuck you, because they know they're not supposed to be doing that kind of stuff. Now, what the consequences would be for that, probably much more severe than what we see in the movie, granted. But this is a movie where we do have action and drama that needs to play out. Now, in regards to them being special forces, you have to remember Anthony Mackie's character says he was in intelligence before, right? So here's the thing. Look, I'm not a veteran, but I know like usually when like that could be you could deride someone for saying they're intelligence, right? But Mackie kind of comes across as like he's been in some shit before, right? He's done some wet work. And now here's the thing. They're using a Barrett Light 50 caliber sniper rifle, right? That shoots a 50 caliber cartridge. It's huge. This gun is designed to take out material. It's an anti-material rifle. What do EOD do? They take out material. What are they trained to use? Barrett Light 50s. So Anthony Mackie actually being, and again, not a super shot. He's not like bam, 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 they're all dead. They've got to sight it in. They've got to line it up. They watch that compound all day with their Capri Suns. So he would have the training to do that, the feasibility to pull that off with those tools at his disposal.
Mr. Bintliff, a shameless promotion for Capri Sun. Did you get this many Capri Suns?
I did not get. We get a little thing called Rippets, and let's just say they're only sold in Dollar General now that the DoD had to offload them. But
I'm going to look into that.
the oh boy, they first anti-material team in terms of the explosives versus using a Barrett Light 50 cal, which, to be perfectly honest, I doubt is on any regular military MTO, and EOD does fall under regular Army. When I mention regular versus irregular, intelligence is a wide berth. It's very much overestimated. But okay, let's say he had been in some very what you would call wet work aspects of it. We're fitting a lot of different career choices that take time, that take training, that is, you wouldn't believe how much schooling, and we're fitting it into these very small careers. It's almost like on a CSI show where they say, oh, I have 7 master's degrees and a PhD. Oh, you speak Farsi? Oh, yes, I picked it up while on vacation. That's the kind of territory we're getting to. And especially one of my favorite moments when David Morse, as the full-bird colonel who just seems to have an absolute raging hard-on for Jeremy Renner's character. How many bombs have you defused? Oh, like 800 and something. Well, that's really something. That's really something, mister. I'm going to let you do whatever you want. You can come home and fuck my sister. That's what first of all, that is an insane number pulled, it seems like. And unless it's mentioned in the original article that somebody has defused that many legitimate bombs in their time, that would be it. I need to read the original article. That is on me. But given that he was an infantryman with the Rangers and then switched to EOD, which will of course require at least a 2-year pipeline, how could he do that within Afghanistan, which did not have an IED issue in the early days of the war? It was very much, I wouldn't say a conventional, but as close to conventional as you could get compared to that time in Iraq. Now, defusing that many bombs in those few years is just absolutely unbelievable. And this whole company, are we to believe, is 3 men doing all this work.
It's an army of 1 or 3 in this case.
He is all that he could
about
be.
The army of 1 thing. Oh, it is an acronym. 1 is an acronym, apparently.
That seems like a retcon. Your Honor, I object.
Officers, NCOs, and enlisted. ONE.
An army of 1, you see.
Well, I mean, the army is made up of those things, so that is fair.
Exactly. Ridiculous acronyms, or you mean the other things? Because all of the above.
It is all of the above based on my research.
Mr. Schlender, any rebuts to what we've heard?
So that number of diffusions is not unheard of in this conflict. I was just watching an interview with someone, and he was talking about how he's probably done about 1,000 over his whole tour. So I do understand that that's a very compressed timeline. I think the way Jeremy Renner says it is a little more flippant, so it probably is a very high number, but it might not necessarily be that number. I think the idea is to really establish. Yeah, I think the idea is just to really establish that he knows what he's doing, he's good at what he's doing, and he enjoys what he's doing, which is one of the larger themes of the movie, of course. That's just one small piece of the puzzle that is our main character.
All right, Mr. Bintliff, do you have any further exhibits you'd like to present?
Yes, it establishes his expertise. It's supposed to garner a reaction out of the audience. And I'm curious about the interview, whether it was a tour or a career. Tour being, one single deployment, usually consisting of anywhere from 6 months to a year, or if we're talking over the course of several tours. So I'd be curious about that.
And if I
that
may
particular
interrupt, I
interview.
think we are supposed to assume
Call
that
an
his
objection.
character has done. Well, it's not really an objection because I'm agreeing with him. Is like I think we're supposed to assume that over his
Overrule it, Your
career,
Honor.
he has done a few tours. I mean, that's how the movie starts with like this tour's wrapping up, and then right at the end, day 365. So he's right back in to it, and I think that's supposed
Overruled.
to be the pattern. Thank you.
Mr. Bintliff, you may proceed.
All right. Even aside from the slightly cringeworthy form of, how the explosives are handled, such as tugging on the wire for dramatic effect, which I will argue makes a fantastic visual scene, it is pants shittingly inaccurate. But still, excellent visuals, which I will give it, but still overall unnecessary with other options present. Now, let's see. Let us using this visual methodology. I would like to move into the camera work, the cinematography. Which there was a time from about 2004 to about 2012 when the shaky camera was, by and large, the best thing that had happened to action cinema since the practical effect explosion. We've seen examples of it in, let's say, TV at the time, such as Lost, and one of my favorites, actually, the Battlestar Galactica. My argument that that works against the Hurt Locker is that it is so overdone more than any other movie or show at the time. That it was.
You did not watch Battle Los Angeles, then.
I think I may have blocked that one out. But
it's a good episode. Go listen.
The Bourne sequels are it for me.
And the Bourne, okay. All right. Appreciate the homework. Thank you. But so I will argue that it is done to an excessive degree in combination with grainy footage, in combination with slow motion transitions of 50 caliber shells dancing in the dirt for much too long. This is the point where that style was tired out and became.
And it won
it
was nominated for an Oscar for its cinematography.
For editing.
And
Best
Picture and Best Director. It was nominated. Believe it or not, it lost to Avatar for cinematography. There's no cinematography in Avatar. It's all computers. But anyway, I don't need to tell Ryan Luis Rodriguez how talented Barry Ackroyd is, but I need to tell everyone else is, because that's the cinematographer for Hurt Locker. And one of the reasons we see the shaky cam, there's a couple different reasons we see it, and then there's a couple of reasons we see it, especially with these kind of gritty modern war movies that the opposing counsel was just discussing. And that is, it's to bring an element of realism to it at that time. Like, we would see that, and that was what realistic cinema kind of was that shaky cam. Was it the wide pan outs or the big stationary shots? That's just not what realistic was. And also, the shaky cam really illustrates one of the biggest dangers that we see with the IEDs, right? And this is actually something, for all the criticism that some veterans have levied against this movie, no one's criticizing the actual explosion work in here, because that's one thing that I was reading that some of the veteran groups were saying, is like, at least it wasn't a big fireball explosion. These are big shockwave explosions. Recall at the beginning of the movie where the first leader of the team, Guy Pearce, I believe, is playing him, right? He's going like, boom, it's the shockwave. I'll appeal to my good friend on the court, Maynard Bangs. How many times do we see shockwaves being the cause of death in Deadliest Warrior? That is lots of times. And that's one of the things this movie does right. And to really make that visceral, having the camera move with that shockwave as opposed to being focused on a big fireball, that makes it very, very effective. And that's why that was nominated for an Oscar. It's ultimately why it won Best Picture.
All right, Mr. Bintliff, would you like to present another exhibit, or are you ready to rest?
So my exhibit for this particular critique is not having to do with the impact, no pun intended, from the explosions and that causing, the shake to really bring us into the moments of the explosions. My exhibit for where this this choice sorry. I lost my words there.
I have to keep all of it now where the laugh doesn't make sense.
Cinematography.
Fucking flawless.
I know. Wow. Me fail English? That impossible. What I'm talking about are just the conversations. There are literally just conversations where it's not even that heated. There's not even any action happening, but it's just so distractingly, unnecessarily shaky, all over the place, looking every different direction, and there's grain in the background but not in the foreground, vice versa. That, I think, is where it falls short for me. But I will give you that the explosions, that aspect of it was revolutionary, was actually heartening to see. But in terms of where it was unnecessary, which was much of the film, from the conversations between Renner and Mackie to Garrity's conversations with the doctor, the psychiatrist, that is where make another choice. It would have been fine with even, I don't know, a daytime television level of shake, an FBI or a Law and Order,
95-year-old granny.
90, yeah. So,
now, Mr. Bintliff, do you have any final exhibits before you rest? And we hand it over to Mr. Schlender to present his exhibits.
One moment. Oh, in terms of, and I've already briefly touched on tactics, just some aspects of they don't even take cover when they are under fire, which is the most mind-numbingly thing. You hit the ground or you find the nearest thing where that could stop bullets between you and the shooter. They're just standing there. Mackie goes off by himself with no rear security whatsoever on the roof. The pacing between Act 1, pacing, I will give it solid. Just that's it, solid. But then 2 start to feels off, and 3, by the time he has gone off the base, after the bomb maker harassing, downtown Baghdad, while still wearing his uniform pants, trying not to garner any attention, is just, it's an Alien Covenant level of the stupid is on purpose to make the plot happen. And the absolute sheer lack of consequence for all these things and any interaction with any kind of next level superior, such as a company commander or first sergeant, that would hold these men accountable, is, I just cannot bring myself to think of this as a good movie. That is all. Thank you, Your Honor.
Right. Thank you. Mr. Schlender, you may present your first exhibit.
No, thank you very much. One of the things I kind of want to talk about, and we touched on it a little bit here, is how consequential the IED was in Iraq and later Afghanistan, as was mentioned. To wit, 48% of the U.S. troops who died in Iraq was to IEDs and their variants, right? We're talking almost 50%. And if you count injuries, soldiers' death and injuries, we get up to 60%. So let me just stress to everyone in this courtroom how serious IEDs were. And I read an amazing article called How the IED Won by Lieutenant Commander Jason Schell. Jason Schell, thank you for your service as well. Going over some of the history of the IED and how we had to address it. And what the Hurt Locker shows us, which is actually pretty prescient at the time, because remember, Hurt Locker took place in about 2004, even though the movie came out in, was it 2008, 2009? With the festivals and stuff, it makes it a little more complicated, right? But the point is, it came out a few years after that. And IEDs were still peaking, still the number one cause of injuries for our soldiers. The Hurt Locker shone a light on it. Now, granted, it wasn't perfect in every respect, as some of the nitpicking from the opposing counsel has pointed out. But if we have to have a war movie that talks about what was happening in Iraq, we would have to have it be, if not the Hurt Locker, something profoundly similar because of the outside impact IED had on operations there.
All right, Mr. Bintliff, did this topic need to be put in the public eye?
I absolutely agree with the opposing counsel in this aspect. If not for the quality of other films and what is possible, this story needed to be told. I do not feel that this was the way it should have been told. It's been basically a more or less fabricated story. It's essentially a war fantasy. I think if it had received the same treatment as Catherine Bigelow's other very successful and very upstanding films, such as Zero Dark 30, have shown, you can take and dramatize a real story and make it amazing, without completely fabricating all of these things that the opposing counsel calls are nitpicky, when really it makes a very real and dramatic subject, sort of, once again, a figure of fantasy, an action film, a cowboy film, with not enough basis in reality. The story needed to be told. Absolutely.
But a different way, yes.
This was not the way to do it, and it could have been done so much better by all involved.
I have
had more time.
I have 300 veterans that would disagree with you. That's right. The Washington, D.C. EOD Memorial Foundation that saw Hurt Locker contemporaneously when it was released, and their response was, quote, very moving. They were the units that had always toiled in obscurity, and they're like, wow, somebody's finally recognized what we do. The Navy SEALs have all these movies, and everyone knows about the Army Rangers and Delta Force, and nobody knows about us. Close quote. That's from an interview in the New Yorker with Mark Bowl after he had screened the movie for the Memorial Foundation. Now, here's the thing, though, because you're right, though. It does get some stuff wrong, and Mark Bowl, again, has been very upfront with why this is a work of fiction. So, why did you get stuff wrong? That's a question that the New Yorker asked. It's a very good question. And you know what he says? He says, quote, the truth is that EOD tactics and procedures are very complicated, and we show some of them, but I didn't want to put troops in harm's way and show all sorts of countermeasures. Now, that actually makes a lot of sense now, doesn't it? Because as we know, the Iraq War would be going on for many more years after this, and the use of IEDs would actually be still just as prevalent and dangerous. So doing something silly like pulling up the daisy chain, obviously that's not going to happen in real life for a number of reasons. A, it could explode. B, daisy chains weigh 600 pounds and Jeremy Renner is really jacked, but he's not pulling up the daisy chain. But that's one of the things in this movie. They're not going to show you all the tips and tricks that Mark saw while he was embedded. And when he talks about that, he talks about the different kinds of EOD personnel he saw. He does talk about the nervous guy, and that made him nervous. He does talk about the really confident guy, and that made him confident. He talked about the guy that uses the robots. Point again, Maynard. This movie has a robot in it.
I noticed.
So, and he talks about the different approaches and how that made him feel being embedded as a reporter, realizing that his life was on the line, realizing, oh my goodness, the longer we stay here, the more like a target I feel, so he appreciated those confident guys who would go out and defuse bombs with their hands. Now, that's not how all of them have to do it. Again, there's like 6,000 EOD soldiers, in the Army right now, not to say nothing of the Navy, Air Force, other branches of the service. So what Mark Bowl did was kind of write a love letter, right? This is an important This is important to tell the people. It's like, this is because, make no mistake, there were bounties on EOD soldiers' heads. That was you would get more praise for taking out an EOD guy in a suit than you would of like a 4-star general if you were in the insurgency in Iraq. They were the prime targets of the insurgency because they would defuse the IEDs, which were weapons of war, not just against our soldiers, but against the civilians as well. So that is really, as far as Mark Bowl, and so from the outside looking in on Hurt Locker, that's the context. But let's look inside the movie, what we actually see on the four corners.
Inside the Hurt Locker?
Yeah, well, we can't look inside the Hurt Locker.
We don't have the combination?
No, we haven't been exploded yet, thank God. So hopefully that's never something we have to worry about. But what we have to also look at is, and I love talking about the military stuff, the political stuff like that. And I'm very appreciative of opposing counsel's service and the knowledge he's bringing in, because I think regardless of where we come down right now, the conversation's been very fruitful. But let's look at this just as a movie, because 50 years from now, this movie is still going to be here. And yes, you have some stuff that is a little dated, like the shaky cam, but that's going to be from every movie here. But what we do have is a sterling performance from our main actors, from Jeremy Renner, from Mackie as well. You may disagree with some of their motivations and some of their character work, but they're very solid for the story that is being told. And we do get a nice arc through the story. The young guy comes full circle, basically, and end up getting injured. And Jeremy Renner's character struggles. It's a very personal struggle, right? It's not supposed to be emblematic of every single bomb disposal guy out there. He is this brand of man that craves adrenaline, that craves action, to be in the thick of it. This is something that's
eats extreme Doritos.
Well, it's true though, but without being facetious, Your Honor, this is a archetype of man that has existed as far back as cavemen. I mean, look at like Sparta, for example. Like, there has always been this strand of warrior out there, and it looks different today because of the way technology has moved. So he's a very technologically advanced, like, Spartan warrior type. And it's not going to be everyone. It's not going to be for everyone's tastes, mind you. But it does reflect something that does exist out there, even if it is uncomfortable. That is something that Mark Bowl was saying in his interviews. He was surprised at how many enjoyed it. The interview I watched with an EOD unit in the Air Force, the guy talks about the reason he wanted to be in the EOD, and he enlisted in 2014, right? So this is after Hurt Locker, and it wasn't because of Hurt Locker. It was because he remembers bombs going off in the World Trade Center back in the early 90s, right? He knows how dangerous bombs are. He knew that that's what was killing our men over there, and that's what motivated him to go into what is one of the, if not the most dangerous field operation work that the military has to offer. And the Hurt Locker just never loses sight of that. And yes, they do break the rules. And you know what? They get called out on it. Mackie punches him right in the face.
That was cool.
You know? Yeah, exactly. You know, like, there are situations, and granted, there would probably be more serious repercussions. But for the purposes of this being an action war movie with that kernel of truth, that kernel of an idea of, like, how can we present the EOD to the people out there to make them understand the gravity of the situation, the danger they're in. There's no one sitting here who was thinking they weren't in danger, right? There's no one sitting here who was like thinking like, oh man, that bomb could go off. You know, I think it was a very effective tool at the beginning to kill Guy Pearce, right? Because, like, oh, hey, this Guy Pearce, like, yeah, he'll live. You know, when they introduced Ralph Fiennes, granted, he's probably not as famous then as he is now, but it's still like, well, hey, like,
I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like, he wasn't nobody. He was a name.
He's in the Avengers.
Yeah, yeah, the other one.
Was he Voldemort yet? Yeah.
Yeah, most certainly.
He was fucking Voldemort.
And wasn't Red Dragon already out? No.
Yeah, Red Dragon was already
maybe.
out.
Well, that's my point. But you see, you're just making my point for me. I appreciate it. You know, he was a name. Boom, dead. You know, so it was very interesting decisions, because it really made you feel like, you know, this could just all, like, Jeremy Renner could just get blown up. And in a way, that would almost be fitting his actions, but he doesn't, and he keeps serving at the end, and that's something special, and that's really what this movie's about, and that's why it was recognized with not only Best Picture but also Best Director. Catherine Bigelow exploding open the glass ceiling, if you will.
All right, are you resting on that?
Let me just double check. Yeah, I feel good a bit.
So both sides have rested their cases. The attorneys will now present their closing arguments. Mr. Bintliff, you may begin.
As I stated in the beginning, this stands alone and reasonably well as just simply an action movie. The realism or attempt at realism, the feeling that I got and other people I have served with was that it simply wore this disguise as a modern war film with the subject that it did in order to gain relevance. We have characters who are at their core unlikable, unrelatable, and the performances of that interaction of soldiers serving together was shallow at best. Between their dialogue, how they respected each other's ranks and positions, they simply just felt like shadows of people, and not even one that a soldier could step into and see themselves. You can't use artistic intention and the idea of telling human stories or a general veteran story to excuse these unlikable characters. The intentions of this film were noble. The execution thereof, despite looking out for, if you want to call it, looking out for the safety of the text, keeping real tactics under wraps, which could easily have been searchable on YouTube and all over the internet at the time. The idea that this writer would use that excuse for honestly lazy action story writing is laughable and kind of trying to garner sympathy points. I respect the research the opposing counsel has done in this aspect. I feel seen and respected in many of his arguments. But this film, I am not surprised it was nominated, but compared to what else was out there that had better cinematography and better direction, such as District 9, is one example.
Also shaky cam. I shouldn't interrupt the closing. I'm sorry.
So, yes, but ironically still not as bad. And my own personal contacts who, even though every military public affairs officer and representative will laud things like this civilly in the public eye, you cannot ignore the backroom whispers of their frustrations, which is what I have been inundated with ever since this movie appeared on screen. From uniform infractions, basic tactical inaccuracies, to introducing plot lines and characters who honestly should have had their own movie. I cannot agree that The Hurt Locker, in its form that it took at the time, deserved the praise it got and needed, I will say, more time to cook. And it could have been something wonderful. Instead, what we got was a shaky cam cowboy movie with some solid effects at best. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Is the world not shaking constantly for everyone else? Is that just me? Mr. Schlender,
you need to see a doctor.
Please present your closing argument.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I just like to thank opposing counsel for his service.
Oh my God! Stop it 3 times! I swear if I hear thank you for your service one more time.
I'm keeping it.
I am glad that you feel like I didn't disrespect or anything, because I obviously
No.
that would never be my intention. Because I actually come from a military family. My father served in the Navy for 22 years, and he was on submarines. He made it all the way to Master Chief. You know, he is a very impressive man. And let me tell you something though, watching submarine movies with him, he'll point out some of those nitpicky things. We still enjoy them though. Hunt for the October, for example. Even Crimson Tide has its moments. But what we're looking at with the Hurt Locker, it is a bit different. It is kind of in a league of its own. And frankly, one of the criticisms is that it's a little apolitical. Frankly, I'm glad we didn't get the Aaron Sorkin ripped from Wikipedia speech. You know, like we didn't need it in this movie here. What this movie was about.
Interjection, I agree with the council wholeheartedly on that, just for the record.
Well, he interrupted your closing, so.
That's only fair. People need to interrupt me more. I'll just never shut up.
All right, that's enough.
Okay, so I'll just put a button on it, Your Honor.
You don't really have to.
I know. I got the facts out, though. I never realized. I mean, we always knew how dangerous IEDs were, obviously. It's right in the name, explosive.
Oh.
But the amount of damage that they've done to our service members, right? To the country, to civilians. I mean, they really are a weapon of terror. And one of the things that Jason Schell ends his article about how the IED won was talking about how the use of IEDs was declining towards the end of the war. And one of the reasons for that wasn't necessarily better tactics, but it was better relations. And that was something we saw in this movie as well. That's with, I admit, Jeremy Renner running off base, a little weird. But again, it foreshadows the direction the war was going, about soldiers getting personally invested in the lives of the people in these communities. And that's ultimately what led to IEDs being less and less used, because the community wasn't standing for them being planted on their turf anymore. It's a sad story, no matter which way you slice it, but it's a story no one would be talking about if not for the Hurt Locker. There would be no cultural memories of the Iraq War. Only 21% of Americans say that the Iraq War had even marginal impact on their life. The amount of servicemen who have served in these two wars is less than 1% of the population. This was very small. This is not going to be remembered the way World War II is. And so when we're picking cultural artifacts, Hurt Locker needs to be one of them. Because yes, it is not perfect, but I will tell you it is good. And the message therein is an important one, and one that we have to remember moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And you know that there were an end to cultural flashbulbs in this courtroom. You know, get them out of here. I can't say it's very photosensitive. God, get them out of here. Members of the jury, Mr. Maynard Bangs, Mr. Big Ben Haslar, and Mr. If I'm going to die, I want to die comfortable, Ryan Luis Rodriguez. You have all heard the facts concerning this case. It is now up to you to determine if this film is guilty of being a bad movie. The bailiff will escort you to the deliberation room to render your verdict.
Right this way. You know, I hate the Hurt Locker. It was always too small for my Hurt Trapper Keeper.
You were going to say you got shoved in the Hurt Locker, right? Or every time you got shoved in the locker, it hurt. Like
there was so much gum under there. Oh shit, that's C4. Fuck!
Oh no!
All right, Hurt Locker. Probably a gentleman's 6 in my mind, but I'm going to go based on the facts presented. I think he did a good job of diffusing a lot of the praise that people give towards this thing. The shaky cam is atrocious. I've always hated it. The only time you should ever use shaky cam is if it's like Blair Witch or something like that. And the fact that it's inaccurate. This movie sells itself. I think even at the time, even in Catherine Bigelow's like sort of speech at the awards about its accuracy, about like sort of celebrating the team members. So if this thing is inaccurate, like, you know, why not use the robots? Like they I get you need to tell a story, but hey, well, we just have a squeaky wagon wheel and that's it. No more robots. Like what? Why would you do that? Why is he tugging on wires? I kept waiting for that thing to just blow up in his face. Yeah, there's a lot of problems, and I don't know that it's was properly diffused on the defensive side with like the we don't want to put servicemen in danger because as the prosecution brought out, you can look up a lot of these things on YouTube, and even like the
YouTube wasn't around in 2004. Just saying.
2007, I think it was.
Look it up.
Whatever, you can look up whatever you want, though. I mean, I don't think that this information was inaccessible to people. So I don't know. The kernel of an idea, I don't know that that's enough because this thing does sell itself on its authenticity. Ryan Luis Rodriguez, what do you think?
I do not hate this movie. In fact, I like it. I've made my stance on accuracy well known. I don't care about it. Never have, never will. Look at The Last Samurai for plenty of examples in that case.
It broke my heart that day, Ryan.
Yeah, I'm sorry. But this, for me, this is a gentleman's 8. I really enjoy... I mean, I guess that you're not supposed to enjoy a war film, because that kind of makes it antithetical. But I do... I appreciate the technique that went into it. I actually think that the shaky cam is actually applicable, because you're trying to convey a headspace. You're trying to convey a sort of de-equilibrium. And I think that Bigelow does that better than practically anybody using a camera today. And it's kind of weird to see baby Hawkeye and baby Captain America in their pre-fame days.
So that is the
so cute.
And I love the fact that Ralph Fiennes is in this because it's a reunion. It's a reunion with Catherine Bigelow after Strange Days. So, Rob, what do you think?
The shaky cam didn't bother me. I just think that with the content of the movie, it just kind of it didn't stick out to me enough to annoy me. So there are sometimes it makes me dizzy. It didn't this time, so it must have worked. Did like the robot. There was a robot. Now, as far as accuracy, I think Bryan convinced me that no one person could do anything that these guys did. But he used the word amalgamation, and I think that that's what obviously these are. This is, in order to tell a story and keep us attached to, less characters, they're having them, fill the roles of maybe 10 or 12 different
Can
people.
I push back on you a little bit? Because you can rewrite the story. I mean, it seems like their intent was to tell something that was at least somewhat accurate. So if you're going to do that, you can still have more characters that are in the background if they're just like, doing cover or whatever. You don't have to just like narrow it down to 3 characters who can do everything.
Well, I don't know, because then you've got to introduce and develop more characters. And I think that was the storytelling choice, was to introduce less, but make them amalgamations, which maybe makes them over-specialized and not what a real person would be, but it is a Hollywood movie.
But the average viewer is not going to know that.
Yeah, I didn't know. I don't know how it was advertised, like, because I didn't see this movie before, so I don't. If it really hung its hat on like authenticity, and this is really boots on the ground.
It did, is in terms of realism, in terms of authenticity, no. But in terms of trying to approximate a situation that had not really been seen on screen this way, that's how they sold it.
Okay. All right. Well, I think they do drop the ball then by really sensationalizing some of these moments for entertainment value, for sure. So I would say that takes down the film. I don't know that it takes it all the way to bad for me. I think it could prevent it from being good, and might convince me that probably didn't deserve the Oscar that year. But all the way to bad movie, I still think there were good performances. I still think the direction is good. I don't know that I'd hurry out to watch it again, but I generally don't really like the Desert War movies. There's not a lot of color to them. But for me, the information on both sides was very impressive. Obviously Bryan went through a lot more for his research. Probably overcommitted a bit.
Deep fucking cover just for this moment.
Exactly. But and unfortunately, I still have to go not guilty.
Ryan?
I appreciate the opposing counsel's not service.
Don't say service. Yeah.
Arguments. I appreciated the context that I was missing. But at the same time, when I watched this movie, that just doesn't bother me. And maybe that's a problem with me Maybe that's a problem with society. I don't know. But I can't call this a bad movie. There's too much that I admire about it to call it bad. So I'm going to have to go not guilty.
Big Ben, is it unanimous?
Well, I do like the performances of Mackie in particular, but Jeremy Renner's also very good. I do like those sort of like vignettes of like sitting all day in the heat and waiting for someone to like maybe pop out a window or something like that. That sells an experience that isn't typically depicted. But for me, like what the whole movie is like the last 10 minutes where you're sort of like jarred, where he's at home and he's shopping and nobody cares about his stories. And then he's like back in the field. Like that's what the movie is. And I don't know. I don't want it to be unanimous though, because that 10 minutes doesn't save the whole experience, especially if that whole experience is inaccurate. So I'll stick with a gentleman's 6 for my personal rating, but I do think the prosecution brought enough that should make people reconsider that Jeremy Renner is the team lead of this group out of nowhere, and yet he's the least experienced. That just makes no sense. The writing in this film is a tad lazy. So I'll go guilty, but that's still not guilty overall. So let's go tell that very handsome judge.
Oh, he is. Mr. Foreman, have you reached a verdict?
We have, Your Honor. In the case of The People versus The Hurt Locker, we find the defendant not guilty of being a bad movie.
The verdict is so rendered. The film receives a dishonorable discharge. It was the best we could have hoped for. Court is adjourned.
Hey man, this is Wavy Waverson, the mellowest reporter at the Gabagool Gazette, filling in for Grumbly Grumblerson, who quit, remember? It's
No!
now. I'm reporting to you live from outside the Reels of Justice. Dylan J. Schlender, do you care to share your groovy thoughts on the jury's verdict, man?
Wavy, it's good to see you, bro.
Good to see you too, brother.
Oh, man. Look, this is one of those cases where I think a lot of people would suspect we'd come out not guilty. So to me, it was really important that we addressed and took seriously the legitimate criticisms that a lot of veterans do have about this movie. And I think we honored them tonight with our conversation, with our discussion. I think it was really, really good. I was very happy and proud to be a part of it. So I think we came out the right way, and I think we got there the right way too. So thank you.
Wow, war, man. Wow. Here comes Bryan Bintliff. Didn't I see you at the Fish concert? Can we get a word on how you feel about today's righteous verdict, man?
I'm not entirely surprised at the verdict. We took a big swing with this case. It needed to be swung at, but overall, it was a fight worth fighting, even though we didn't come out on top this time. But I faced some really impressive, I faced a really impressive adversary. War is hell, but this was very much a gentleman's conflict. And better luck next time. But you know how they say, go big or go home. So next time I'll pick something that's not an Academy Award winner.
You should swing at a pinata, man. Thank you very much. That's all we have from the courthouse today. Let's go back to the studio for some far-out post-trial analysis. Waverson out, man.
Groovy. Schlenzo, is it true that your slogan is Semper Fudge?
Look, I can't confirm that because we still have other Schlenzos out in the field, and I don't.
That's great. Bryan,
also, I thought that was bullshit too. Just when he said that, he's like, "I'm not going to tell you what we got wrong." I was like, "Oh, that's so Weasley."
Yeah, it was Weasley. But great case, and I do think this took the movie down a few pegs. Probably did not deserve its Oscar, but it did bring us Hawkeyes. So now
had to be told,
right?
I know, good conversation.
Big reunion.
Had to be told.
Now, what, Bryan? What has been keeping you busy? What do you do when you're not prosecuting movies?
So when I'm not prosecuting or getting associated with the director that I just spoke against, No. She's really is a fantastic director, and I do want to say Zero Dark 30 was fantastic and an amazing bounce back. But aside from that, I'm filming a short that I wrote during my last deployment called Burning Virtue, and Burning Virtue tells the story of an ex-con in Texas trying to get her life back in order when working at a fifth-rate car rental agency in rural Texas, and a girl comes basically stumbling into the office trying to rent a car with cash. And obviously, if any of you've tried to do that, you would definitely be asked to leave the Hertz office. But it turns out this girl is trying to escape from abuse and worse things from her family and their associates. And this becomes apparent when a couple of far-right militia bikers trying to turn the girl in for the Texas governor's bounty on people seeking or giving reproductive treatment, abortions, when they come seeking that bounty. And our protagonist, our hero Ellen, has to decide whether or not she wants to risk her newfound freedom or stick her neck out for this girl and risk her life, and also her past association with this particular militia. So we have a fantastic cast thus far, including Meatloaf's daughter.
Meatball?
Random.
I don't know.
I know. I just
for your movie, but I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, she's once, twice, three times a lady.
Very excited to have all these folks aboard. But so that's what we are going to be filming and directing at the end of September. And pretty much, unless we have a pretty nice fundraising campaign, which will start in the next 2 weeks or so, I'm basically paying for the entire thing out of pocket from, as I said, my last deployment, which was between March 2022 to March 2023.
Nah, Schlender's going to back this thing for your service.
Yeah, best of luck.
Now,
that's what I interpret all that to mean.
When does the you said the fundraiser will start soon?
Yes, we are going to be starting the Seed and Spark the second week of the end of the first week of September, so somewhere between the 6th to the 9th of September, and it will go for a month after that.
Well, that's right now.
Through filming.
That's now. That's right, because it's September, right?
At the numbers right now, and
yes,
we are.
We're
almost at goal, so people will have to go right now and put it right over the top.
Please do. It's
and you'll have to tell. Can you remind us the name so that we can search it?
The name of the film
Spark would be the site.
Yes, Seed and Spark is the site. Burning Virtue is the name of the film, and we are also trying to get this film seen so that it could potentially be optioned for a feature, as the short is basically what would be the first 15 minutes of a feature film, but it is its own story. Anyway, no, thank you guys so much for the platform to introduce that, promote it. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, hopefully
if we can help filmmakers, we will.
Yeah, we should be able to share the link too. So
even
we'll
do
that out. Now we
Good
always ask
filmmakers, Ben.
Any filmmakers, I don't care.
I was gonna say, let's get the bad filmmakers in here too.
Yeah. If it wasn't for bad filmmakers, we'd have nothing to do.
We definitely want to see the bad filmmakers, please. Yes.
Yes.
Now we always ask for recommendations from our guests for movies that you think people should see. So, what is a movie that you think people should see?
Oh, well, I've already made not necessarily the film, but the recommendation that it seems a lot of you have already seen of Generation Kill. It is one of my absolute favorites, possibly the best all-around depiction of the modern U.S. military, the invasion of Iraq, and the plight that underwent not only the service members themselves involved in that very contentious and just absolute political, pardon my pun, landmine of a war.
If I can do diffuse, you're allowed.
Yeah, exactly. And it did go into how it affected the civilians. So that is my overall that is my recommendation.
And it did it all in 8 episodes.
Schlenzo, what have you got for us?
In the spirit of war movies, I have a star-studded one that you won't believe. That's right, we have Steve McQueen, James Coburn, and Bob Newhart. That's right, Bob Newhart. He even does his telephone bit. I'm talking about Hell is for Heroes from 1962. It is a World War II feature that follows a small group of GIs that are holding off a German advance. And very much like Jeremy Renner's character, Steve McQueen is a loner who likes playing by his own rules, but he'll do whatever it takes to stop those Nazis, because if there's one thing Steve McQueen can do, it's mess up Nazis with the help of Bob Newhart and Bobby Darin. That's right, Bobby Darin's in this too. This movie's insane. I can't believe it actually exists.
Can't wait to see
You have to go watch it right now. If it's not on Tubi, it damn well should be. I had to slap together this recommendation at the last minute, so I haven't had time to check. Ryan, have you seen this?
No.
You guys got to see this movie. It's amazing.
General,
Ryan, have you seen it?
I was going to say, I was like, hey, you know what? Sometimes people call me Ryan. It is a thing. But no, I have not seen that, but I will get on that.
It's pretty excellent.
General, the Nazis, they're coming over the hill. Yeah, right now. I can see
just a little bit. Let's get to some punching, guys.
All right. Well, so what it is that they find that their post is bugged, so they have Bob Newhart on the radio giving false intelligence briefings. So he's just doing he's just doing one of his bits. It's brilliant.
That's fantastic.
It's so good.
Now, my recommendation today is a look at the lighter side of warfare. It's 1994's In the Army Now, starring Pauly Shore.
All right.
Two slackers sign up for the Army Reserves to get money for a startup, but are immediately called for duty into some godforsaken hellhole. This film contains a gritty and realistic depiction of a U.S. ground-based incursion into Chad if it were coordinated by David Alan Grier. Now, I know there are a lot of Shore shamers, a lot of Pauly poopers out there on social media who probably want to at me and say, what are you talking about? Pauly is the most unlikable person in the entire universe. And I'm here to say, this movie proves you wrong. Andy Dick is the most unlikable person in the universe.
Correct. Hard yes. Hard yes.
But much to Shore's credit, he carries deadweight Dick throughout the entire film, which is probably how he got so buff. Well, buffer Pauly Shore, anyway. But what this film lacks in Andy Dick, it more than makes up for with Lori Petty. That's right, Tank Girl herself, a whole year before she would appear as Tank Girl, clearly laying the groundwork for that performance, as well as laying the groundwork for several of our burgeoning sexualities. Keep an eye out for a wild Brendan Fraser appearance, recurring his role as Link from Encino Man for a brief cameo, which keeps these films and Son-in-Law all in one continuous universe. Eat your heart out, MCU. It was all before you ever got to do it. The Shore universe was out there.
There's a Shoreverse?
Yep. I watched this movie a ton as a kid. Pauly Shore is a vibe before we even called things vibes. I don't know where it's streaming, but I think you should go check it out. They should play at recruitment centers. I think it would work.
Honestly, I give you all the credit for promoting In the Army Now, because there's nothing more realistic than a bunch of active duty soldiers picking on the reservists. And give an opportunity.
But they saved them in the end. It's a heartfelt story.
I know. I'm a reservist now. How do you think I feel?
It inspired you. Big Ben, what have you got?
My recommendation is not related to the Hurt Locker that I know of, beyond probably being within 5 degrees of Kevin Bacon, but it's new and it's good, which is a feat that has been super rare in 2024 because we've seen seemingly tapped out on quality early. It's Strange Darling. Now, Strange Darling is a hard one to recommend because the thing that's good about it are its secrets. So I don't want to say too much about the film, as the less you know, yes, the less you know, the better your experience will be, just like Rob.
Damn it.
That's my new tag. Suffice to say, what the trailer offers you isn't the whole of the story, but I'm sure you knew that already. Without giving too much away, I will say that the film is a great example of how to tell a story in non-chronological order. The story is broken up into 6 parts, and like Star Wars, it kind of starts you off in the middle, but it leaves you asking the right questions. It'll jump forwards and backwards in time, and you'll find yourself going, oh, okay, so that's what that person's doing. But then wait, that only opens up further questions, and then your perspective will shift again and again. Hopefully that isn't too much information. Ryan, did I ruin it?
No, you did not.
Ruin for me.
And
You
Ben
ruined
is right.
absolutely nothing.
We did peak with Kung Fu Panda 4 very
Didn't ruin
early
for
in
me. I wasn't
2024.
listening.
Yeah, you called that. You did.
I'm just kidding.
Ryan, why don't you send us on home?
My recommendation this week is a Bengali masterpiece from Satyajit Ray, director of the Apu trilogy, 1963's The Big City. The film follows a housewife who, in direct opposition to her husband's protests, takes on the profession of a saleswoman that becomes essential when said husband loses his job. The Big City was Ray's first film set in contemporary society, or at least contemporary for 1963, but his laser-sharp focus, empathy for his characters, and innate sense of composition of Academy ratio frames continues unabated. I've been ravenously taking in a lot of world cinema lately, and it has certainly reaped tremendous benefits. Getting to digest cultures from all around the world, and this film is no exception. The Big City is currently streaming on what used to be HBO Max.
Digesting cultures is really good for your stomach. I try to get yogurt, Greek yogurt, whenever I can.
I love that. That's a good one.
I know. But with that, we're all out of show, but we want to thank our guest, Bryan Bintliff, for joining us. Thank you so much, Bryan.
Thank you again, gentlemen. Much appreciated for having me. And I look forward to listening to even more of these court cases in the future.
And we'll have you back for
Reappearing
some
on some.
because I heard that slander about Alien Covenant earlier, and I'm not going to let it go. So I plan on personally bursting out of your chest and screaming sometime in the future. And I hope everyone will join us for that as the reels of justice keep turning.
Count it.
Tugging wires.
Oh, God, I'm glad you said wires.
Could have gone anyway.
Please follow us on Twitter at Reels of Justice, Instagram Reels of Justice, and Facebook.com/Reels of Justice.